Rudolf Steiner, in his book Nature's Open Secret, writes about Goethe, the poet and writer, who during a trip once only brought a single book with him, and how Goethe believed that this was ideal because it allowed him to reread the book, and that Goethe believed that was the best way to gain knowledge when you're reading. The reason I include this quote is because our backlogs are getting bigger and bigger, and rather than completing a game and eventually replaying it, we immediately move on to the next game. Combine that with streaming services like Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus, and it feels like there's just too much to play. It's the consume and don't ask questions, if you remember that from not too long ago. But if you remember, as kids, we didn't have these things. We couldn't just consume and move on. Most of us didn't have a massive catalog of games to play from like people do today. We had some games and we would play those, and sometimes over and over again. We didn't have a Game Pass or a PlayStation Plus. We had the games we physically owned that our parents would sometimes buy for us, and we would just play those over and over again. We'd get absorbed into these worlds, get attached to the characters, master the gameplay, etc. With everything vying for our attention, it feels as though we have to finish something quickly and just as quickly move on. Replaying a game enhances the experience and joy of gaming by allowing you to interact with the game in a way that allows you to truly immerse yourself in the experience, protects you from an overload of consumption, and gives you new reasons to love something you already adore. Now, I do want to say this, that keep in mind when I say replay games, I'm typically talking about games you enjoyed. I'm not saying to put in more hours in a game you didn't already enjoy, but there could be some merits in that, but I'll kind of go into that later in the video. The main problem that keeps people from replaying games is a combination of two things: consume and don't ask questions, and the fear of missing out. When you consume and don't ask questions, you simply finish one thing and immediately move on to the next, not even taking the time to truly appreciate what you just experienced. As children, most of us didn't have these large assortment of games like I mentioned, so we couldn't just consume and move on. We had to play with what we had, and we had to re-immerse ourselves in the experience. We got lost in these worlds and these characters without having our attention constantly vied for by everything around us. Enjoying video games is so simple, so why do we complicate it? We play games for enjoyment, but you're so focused on what to play next or completing your backlog that you're not even enjoying what you're currently playing, defeating the entire purpose of why we play games. Games are enjoyment, they're art, and yes, I did call it art. It's not a checklist that we have to complete so we can go on some website and make a comment about did we enjoy it or not enjoy it and blah blah blah, and then immediately move on to the next experience. Games are meant to be enjoyed, inspire us. In ancient Greece, Achilles was the most respected man who was written by Homer for the Iliad. Greek men read this and were inspired to great heights, like Alexander the Great, for example. Most people today can't even really tell you why they like the game. They'll just say, it was good, it was fun. They might use some talking points they heard from somebody else's like essay video or whatever they are, but it's not really an experience they can tell you about. By revisiting a game and replaying it, you're giving yourself the opportunity to make it a part of you rather than something you consume and to move on from. I can talk for hours about my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy X, and to tell you about theories I have regarding the game and its themes that you wouldn't hear from anybody else, because it's coming from me and I've experienced the game and I've made it a part of myself. And I can tell you things about the game you wouldn't hear from anybody else. It's not to say you can't do the same thing. You could also do this if you give games your love and your attention. You could see something in the game that maybe somebody else wouldn't. And in this way, I think it's important to enjoy and make the game an experience that's worth remembering, and you won't get this if you simply consume a game and to move on. I think it's great that you learn to take the time to replay something and give yourself more time to enjoy it. Next, I will focus on the fear of missing out. You're so afraid of missing out that you don't even enjoy what you're currently playing. Brilliant games have been released and they will continue to be released. On a website known as Backlog, you get to create lists for your backlog, and mine has over 300 games. It's not even including games that are going to be announced in the future. But I don't let myself be overwhelmed by this. I just have to remember why I play games in the first place. They're fun. I'm not playing games to check off my list and go over how many more games I want to play. I'm playing these for enjoyment. And I can't enjoy something if my mind is on, oh, I've still got 300-ish more games I have to go through. I need to finish this as quickly as possible and immediately move on. Instead, it makes more sense to give your love and all of your attention to what you're currently playing so you can enhance the experience of what you're currently going through. If I truly enjoy the game, then I'll make a mental note of returning to it eventually so I can re-experience it. But at this point, I should mention that I don't really replay games I didn't enjoy. I typically replay games either because I really loved it and I want to go back to it, or if I didn't like it or if I didn't enjoy it, there's got to be something about it that makes me want to come back. Maybe it's the art direction, maybe it's the soundtrack, maybe it's the story. There has to be something that sticks out even if I didn't really enjoy anything else. The example I'm going to use here is a game I finished my replay of just a few months ago, and that was Final Fantasy XIII. So I had plenty of issues with the game, but I loved the aesthetics. I thought the story content was great, even though the execution was weak, and the music was absolutely breathtaking. But even beyond that, I adored the modern take on the ATB/turn-based system, known as paradigm shifts. On my first playthrough of the game, I thought Final Fantasy XIII was like the hardest RPG or just the hardest game I had played. I was dying regularly against just regular battles. Upon replaying and taking my time to learn the combat, it's become my favorite combat system of all time. So when I usually play a game for the first time, I don't like having a lot of documents around. I don't like researching it too much, because if you remember, as kids, we didn't really do that. Because as kids, we would pick the game up, we would go through the booklet that came in the game, and we would just get started. We didn't take too much time going through all the theory and whatever else it is about the game. But when I replay a game, I like to go through some more documentation. I like to maybe research the game a bit more, because now I've experienced it. Now I know a bit more about how to play the game, things I liked, things I didn't, and now I can spend more time on the other miscellaneous things. So when I replayed Final Fantasy XIII this time around, I found a document made by a fan of the game which goes extensively into the combat and customization of the game, which I had to kind of learn by trial and error the first time I played it. If I had read this during my first playthrough, not only would I not really get what it's saying because I haven't really had the experience with the game, but I wouldn't get to experience the combat for myself like I would as a kid, which is when games were the most enjoyable for us. It wasn't just because we were kids, it was because we had the sense of wonder for games. We wondered about it. We wanted to go into it like it was our first time, and even if we were replaying the game, now that we had that sense of wonder completed, there was some more that we wanted to experience. Now we want to get really good at the gameplay. Now we really want to master and get some of the characters maybe we didn't last time, or who knows what. People today have to go online and go through like the tips and tricks of a game before they even start a game, which again, we didn't do as children. We just got into it, and that made games a lot more fun. I like the first playthrough to be my way of interacting with the game myself, making mistakes and learning from them rather than going online and learning absolutely everything. But now that I mentioned all that, I want to go back to the fear of missing out, and hopefully I've made it clear now that the fear of missing out is hurting your ability to enjoy games. I always mention and I always go back to us being children, but the reason I do that is because you enjoyed games more when you were a child, and it's not just because you had less stresses, and I'm sure all of that definitely does play a role, but I wonder how much of it was as children we just wondered more. As children we wanted to absorb ourselves into these worlds rather than going through a checklist of things we'd like to play. For us, even if it was just one game, I'm sure we've all had that one game we spent hundreds of hours on, not because of wanting to play it and move on. It was because we wanted to absorb everything we could about it because we loved it. I want to end this video by bringing up some counter arguments that I know some people are definitely going to be making. For starters, there are going to be people who are going to say that there are just too many good games to play, and also that some games are just too long to replay. For starters, yes, there are many good games out there, and there will be more to be released that have great art direction and unique stories and We want to experience them all rather than just continue replaying the same game. But I'll say this, what's the point of playing a good game if you don't really take the time to immerse yourself in the experience? I want you to compare two people. First, you have somebody who's played 50 games in a single year and ran through them all, did the basics of it, and just went from one to the next to the next. And I want you to look at the other who's played maybe less than half of that, but he took the time to really immerse himself in the game, replay it here and there, and he truly enjoyed those games. Now, this leads me into my second counter argument about some games being too long, and I just want to make it clear that when I say replay games, I'm not even necessarily saying replay every game you play. That'd be kind of crazy. For me, it's more so, again, going back to the two criteria I mentioned, either something you really enjoyed or something maybe you didn't entirely enjoy but you want to go back to. Now, when people talk about some games being too long to play, I always bring up how I mainly play RPGs, and these games are like at the very least 30 hours. But with RPGs, I feel like, number one, you kind of have to replay it because by the time you're at the end of the game and it's your first time playing it, chances are you don't really remember some important story points, or maybe there are certain things you missed in the game. I also want to bring up that when I play games, I typically have a rotation, and that rotation includes about 3 to 5 games. And only one of them, or maybe at most 2, but typically just one of them is one that I'm replaying. So I'm not saying that you should only replay or that you should spend your entire time replaying. I'm saying that if you are somebody who likes to play longer games like myself, just one of them being in your rotation is enough when it comes to replaying a game. I recently replayed Final Fantasy VI, which I completed in about 30-ish hours, and I missed quite a bit of the game, including multiple recruitable characters and certain side content, but I'm not really mad or worried. I know I'll replay the game again maybe 3 to 6 months down the line, and again, I should mention there's not really a set point for when you should replay something. I hope this video helps you look at replaying games differently as a way of re-experiencing these worlds and characters, and take more time to replay those games rather than feeling like you're missing out or that you want to consume one thing and immediately move on. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from everybody and hear about your different experiences with replaying games, why you like it or maybe you don't like it. I want to hear all of it, so please let me know in the comments below. And until the next one, see you later.